Shabbat Shalom Mishpacha. Okay, our lecture today is going to be Parsha's Beshalak, and this is in the book of Exodus, and we will be beginning at, let me go and look, chapters 13 and verses 17. So let's see what happens here. And it says here, and this is the reading from the Hidden Truths Hebraic Scrolls, and it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that Elohim did not lead them by the way of the land of the Plashtim, although that was near, for Elohim said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Mitzrayim, that's Egypt. But Elohim led the people around by way of the wilderness of Sea of Reeds, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Mitzrayim. And Moshe, that is Moses, took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, Elohim will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. And they took their journey from Sukkoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. So here what we are told is that finally, after the 10 plagues were done, Pharaoh did allow them to leave, albeit for a short period of time he was okay for them to go. But then when his advisors came to him and his people, and they said to him, how can you let these people go? Because what we're going to have for labor? Who is going to do our labor, and who's going to build our cities? And then at that point, Pharaoh changed his mind and pursued after them with his chariots. He told his people to prepare the best chariots and prepare the forces that were there. And so they started to chase after the children of Israel in the desert. And here we are presented in verse 17 with a conundrum, which basically God says that God did not lead them through the land of the Philistines because God said lest they are afraid of war. So what does that mean? It basically means this. It wasn't that God was thinking that, oh, they're going to fight the Philistines and Philistines might be an obstacle. It was the fact that part of the tribe of Ephraim had departed 30 years earlier before the destined time. 300,000 of them who couldn't wait, they were in a hurry to leave, and they had decided that enough was enough. They're not going to wait around, they're not going to wait for God, and they're not going to wait for nobody else. So they just decided to go. They decided to take their chances and leave. What happened? The route to the land of Israel from Egypt was quicker from the land of the Philistines. So they went through the land of the Philistines, ended up having a war with the Philistines, and the Philistines, who were of course enemies of Israel, they ended up slaughtering them all. So this was, by the way, 30 years before the actual Exodus. So what happened then, that God decided that if God had taken them through the land of the Philistines again, although this time God was with them and would have helped them to defeat the Philistines, but the issue wasn't the defeat of the Philistines, the issue was the psychological issue of them seeing the bones of their brethren that had gone through there, and they would have been discouraged, and maybe some of them would have decided to say, you know what, we'll go back to Egypt because, look over here, our previous people who left, they're all dead over here. So that's why God said that He would not lead them through the land of the Philistines. And that was kind of a interesting shift the Torah explains to us. We also, if we go back, and we also read that they took the body of Joseph with him. Now Joseph had put them under oath, and since Joseph had already died at that point, when the Exodus came, they had to fulfill their oath and take Joseph's coffin with them to the land of Israel. And it says, it explains the journey they took. It also explains the fact that Israel went up in orderly ranks. In other words, the tribes were formed as 12 tribes, and they left in 12 lines as would soldiers. So they left in 12 lines, so that they would be in orderly tribes. And it also says in verse 21, and Hashem went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way. By the way, in the Hidden Truths Hebraic Scrolls, it is the sacred names. I'm just using Hashem because, to keep the name sacred. And Hashem went before them by day in the pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. In other words, they had a 24-hour journey, and they would walk until God said go, and they would stop when God said stop. And here we are told that God was as a pillar of cloud in the morning to them, to cover them from all sorts of elements, heat, extreme heat of the desert, extreme thirst, things like that. They would still get thirsty, of course, but not as much as they would otherwise. And then at night, when it was totally dark, sun was out, God would provide light in the form of a pillar of fire that will, kind of almost be like you carrying torches, flashlights, but much, much powerful. They would be like, flashlights on helicopters. They would illuminate your way, and you know exactly where you step in the sand and not to get hurt. And it says here that God says He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar by night from before the people. In other words, it was always there throughout their journeys. And they ended up, verse 14 explains to us, the children of Israel, they ended up in a place called Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea opposite Baal-Zephon. Now here was a place of idolatry in the past, in which people had erected, Migdol basically means like a tower. They had erected a tower there, and they would go there and perform their deeds before foreign gods that they believed were gods for them. And that was close to the sea. And so Pharaoh had entrapped them, by the sea on one side and the wilderness on the other side. And so, the children of Israel could not run this way or that way. If they went forward, there would be the sea. They would drown. And if they went back, then Pharaoh's armies would kill them all or capture them. And here we see that Pharaoh in verse 7 tells us that he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Mitzrayim with captains over every one of them. And it says, Hashem hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with boldness. But the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-Hahiroth before Baal-Zephon. So Baal-Zephon kind of was a head, where they came to a head, where it was not, now the sea was one side and wilderness on the other. And so here, now the house of Israel, children of Israel, they were extremely afraid, being human beings. They were fearful that what will happen to us. There's water in front of us and there's desert behind us. And they cried out to Hashem, and they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? So why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Mitzrayim? So they were angry at this point with Moses, complaining that you have brought us here to kill us. And so, contrary was the case. And even at this point, they're telling Moses that let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. So they thought that by going back, by returning, they can become slaves again, and it is better to serve the Egyptians than to live than to die. And Moses then said to the people, do not be afraid, stand still and see the salvation, see the rescue of God, for He will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. Hashem shall fight for you, and you shall hold your peace, your shalom. So here then we see that, but lift up, He lifts up, it says at this point, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over to the sea and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. So here the rod was lifted up, and as the rod was lifted up, the sea was divided into 12 lanes. The water rose up on the sides of the sea and froze, totally froze, like a lake, frozen lake on one side. And the middle of the sea, there was 12 like roads or lanes. And the 12 tribes of Israel went down into the sea and the other side. And while the Egyptians were still behind them. And it tells us that God was with them to fight their battles, so they need not fear that the Egyptians are after them. So it's just amazing that how, when you trust God, that God is the one who provides the way. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot, in life, we go through many phases of darkness and light similarly. It doesn't mean that when we are going through phases of darkness or dark periods of our life, it doesn't mean that during those periods we are depressed, we are worried, we are fearful, what's going to happen. As human beings it can happen, but we are not meant to be like that. We are supposed to remain, we're supposed to have fortitude, we're supposed to be strong-willed, strong mind, and when we are in strong mind and strong will, we won't go far wrong because God will always be there for us. That is the whole point. Now, the issue, the story about Joseph's bones, that he had placed an oath. So how did Moses know that the place where Joseph was buried? Because they had hid Joseph's coffin. It wasn't in sight. It wasn't like it's an open field. They hid it, and Sirach, the daughter of Asher, who was from that generation, she was still alive. She was an old woman, but she was still alive and well. And Moses actually went to her, because she was a very wise woman. Moses went to her and asked her, do you know where Joseph was buried? And she answered him and said, the Egyptians have made an iron coffin for him, which they sunk, which they kind of hid in the Nile, so its waters should be blessed. Even with the dead body of Joseph in the water of Nile, which was, going to all the valleys and where all the crops grew, and where even Egyptians picked up their water. They had a coffin there with a dead body of Joseph, and the Egyptians believed that Joseph's body in the waters would bless the water. Can you imagine that? It's surprising, isn't it, that a righteous man like Joseph who died, even though when a body is buried, see, here's the interesting part. When a body is buried in a graveyard, technically we say that the area is unclean. That if you go to that area, you will be unclean for 7 days. But here, isn't it amazing that, did that not make the waters unclean? But then again, that was a river that was flowing all the time. So it clearly shows that all the time that the body was there, it did bless Egypt. And so their belief was correct in that Joseph's body did bless them in many ways. So it is important to understand, when righteous people are buried in your land, in your city, in your states, in your countries, that they do bless that country. Yes, they may be dead in the body, but they're not dead in spirit and soul. And this is what we're told, that when Moses went to search for the body, the coffin, he stood on the bank of the Nile and called out, "Joseph, Joseph, the time has arrived regarding which God swore, I will deliver you, and the oath which you imposed upon the children of Israel has reached the time of fulfillment. If you show yourself, well and good, and if not, then okay. So otherwise, behold, we are absolved of your oath." Immediately Joseph's coffin floated to the surface of the water, so there was some power there. His coffin came up, and so they were able to pick up his coffin, his sepulcher, and take it with them. And that is interesting, that how, even at that point, Joseph's coffin came up in such a case. And so I think that there are several lessons that we can learn from this story. And one of them is that when you are trusting in God through thick and thin, you cannot fear. Fear would remove love from you, and God is love. So by fearing, technically you're removing God from yourself, because remember, God is love. Fear is the opposite of love. So you need to keep your courage, you need to keep your fortitude, and God will always come through for you. But you need to be trusting. And that is the point when Moses told the children of Israel, because when they were all trying to say, let us go back to Egypt, so we don't, so that we don't die, because otherwise sea is shutting us in, and the other side is the army that is coming to catch us. But here you see, again, they were fearful, yet God had a plan for them. So it is very important that we always trust the plans that God has made for us, and we follow through with those plans. Sure, you need to know what you want in life. You can't just go, like a headless chicken. You need to know what you want. And once you know what you want, you hand that plan to God, and then God will take care of that plan for you. And you need to be diligent to that plan in order to fulfill it. Because it's only by your diligence, discipline, that plan can be carried out, executed. And if you are wavering, 1 minute you're here, it was like the children of Israel, 1 minute they are there, and the next minute they want to go back to Egypt. Well, that wasn't much of a plan then, would it? If we didn't have leaders like Moses and Aaron, then the children of Israel would have gone back, because they were fearful. They didn't really, if you really think about it, they didn't really have a trust on God. Even though they saw the miracles in Egypt, yet little they forget the miracles so fast, and they had no trust, or at least very little trust, that they had completely forgotten that they had a cloud, by day protecting them, and they had a light, a pillar of fire like a light at night. How can you forget that? In spite of that, they did forget. They did forget very quickly when fear came upon them. So the lesson is not to allow fear to overcome you. Because if you do, the game is over. It's the end. So, you go to who dares wins is the motto of the SAS, the British Secret Service, the British Special Forces, the Special Air Service. Their motto is who dares wins. Means that, once you've gone into the battlefield, that's it. There's no turning back. You got to go and carry out your plans. And similarly, once you left Egypt, there's no turning back. It's forward march only. There's only one direction, and that is in front of you, not behind you. And this is something that I think everybody needs to learn, and everybody needs to learn and follow through with it. And so, unfortunate thing is that this is something that doesn't come by birth. It's something that comes by experience. So experience says you got to be diligent, you got to trust God. So, I'm going to leave it as a short message because this is not a Torah class for, count this as a Torah class for beginners, because, you want serious study, then pick up the books, pick up the Hidden Truths Hebraic Scrolls and start studying. And then, when you get stuck and you join us and you're with us, and then you can learn more of what direction God is taking His people. So with that, I will say have a wonderful Shabbat, and until next time, Shabbat Shalom.